Welcome, everyone, to the ICSS Sunday Morning Marxist Forum. My name is Alan Miller, and I'm a member of the Program Committee for ICSS Sunday Morning Sessions. We are based in Oakland, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, USA. Our weekly programs are online via Zoom every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time. You can sign up at our website, icssmarks.org, to receive weekly email announcements for our Sunday sessions. You can also view videos of past presentations, send us a message, use our contact form, which is again at icssmarks.org. We want to call your attention to the coffee cup icon on our homepage and our donation page, where you can make a donation to support our programs. We are fortunate today to have with us award-winning, project-censored investigative journalist Peter Byrne to present his groundbreaking expose, The Dangerous Militarization of AI and the Profiteering Behind It. Peter has been researching the collaboration of Silicon Valley, the Department of Defense, banks, corporate media, and academic institutions in developing artificial intelligence for military applications. His work is featured on Project Censor's website in the series Military AI Watch at projectcensored.org military/AI-watch. And we'll drop that in the chat for those of you who want to pick up and bookmark or go to that URL. That's projectcensored.org/military-AI.watch. We will start as usual with a presentation, and after a short break for announcements, we'll have a group discussion where you can express your views on the subject and ask questions. So, welcome to the Sunday Morning Marxist Forum, Peter. We're really happy to have you.
Wow, thanks for inviting me. If people want to see the series after we talk today, you can just Google it at Military AI Watch. Unfortunately, the first couple of URLs will actually take you to stores where they will sell you military AI watches. But if you put in Military AI Watch and Project Censored, you get to the right place. It's a 10-part series. It started in March. It will go through February, I think. Once a month, the last Thursday of every month, I do a approximately 3,000 word piece based on several years of research. The problem with reporting on artificial intelligence, in my opinion, is that a lot of it is just slop and cheerleading. I mean, the New York Times is one of the worst of all of them. I mean, everything that Silicon Valley does gets cheered by the Cabe Metz and their other reporters. And it's just this vast swamp of writing about AI in Substack, some of which are good, some of which, are just corporate PR stunts. But there's very little reporting on the military applications of artificial intelligence. There's some reporting, as it were, in academia. There's people write papers and stuff. They don't get a whole lot of attention. And the military trade journals like Defense One, for example, will report on contracts, but the kind of overview of what's going on with military AI was missing, which is why we launched this series to fill this gap. And it's been pretty popular. It's gotten tens of thousands of reads, and I've been invited on a lot of podcasts, like, mostly to the left of this one, I presume, but not all. And it's a topic that fascinates people. So I think what I'll do is just go over the essence of the first five articles that we've published. The sixth one will come out at the end of the month. Um, and maybe since this is a Marxist forum, I went and got and dug out my version of Capital, which was very well annotated 30 years ago, and found a few things that I thought were still germane. Actually, a lot of it's still germane. And we could talk about that. So the first piece was actually 7,000 words, which is a lot. After that, my editor said no more than 3,000, and I agreed. It's called One Ring to Rule Them All. Silicon Valley's plan to conquer the world with AI weapons. Can we do anything about it? And basically, it starts out by deconstructing Palantir and Anduril, which do get a little bit of press. You may have read about them. Palantir, for the last 20 some odd years, been has created the software that runs the surveillance towers along the southern border, and it has vastly integrated its software into the Ukraine and to Gaza, where it selects targets. Anduril, which is his cousin, because they're both created and funded by Peter Thiel, who is the anti-democratic, misogynist, ultra-reactionary godhead at Silicon Valley, the billionaire Peter Thiel, you probably heard of. He created both of these institutions and they work together. Anduril is more hardware focused. They do the kinetic aspect of it. You know, I love these military terms. Kinetic means kill, right? I mean, as part of the so-called kill chain, right? I mean, they come up with these ridiculous phrases like intelligence community, right? Like it's some community of like 17 intelligence agencies sitting around having coffee, discussing about all the good things they're going to do in the world. Intelligence community. Cabal might be more appropriate, I suppose. Anyway, Teal came out of that whole thing. The Palantir was originally funded by In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's investment arm. People have some have heard of that, others haven't, but it's been vastly influential for 2 decades now in identifying startups in not just AI, but in all of IT that have military and intelligence applications and getting them started with infusions of capital. And In-Q-Tel started Palantir with Thiel, who made his first fortune in PayPal along with Musk and other oligarchs. They're still around causing trouble in the military sphere. And for 20, almost 20 years, it was privately owned by Thiel and this ridiculous character named Alex Karp, who pretends to be a leftist of all things when he's actually pretty much to the right of anybody you can think of in history. His claim to that is that he was a student of Habermas, right? Well, you know, Habermas might have been good back in the day, but he later became kind of strange around Israel and subjects like that. Karp, however, is very adamant about his views on Israel. The Palestinians deserve to die, and I'm going to get there using this technology, which he sells, is what he says. He's written books. He's very much out there. He's kind of the beard for Peter Thiel in a way, you know, to make the liberals think that everything is under control and that somehow they're doing the right thing by designing their algorithms only to find guilty people. So Palantir's financial mode of operation is I found quite interesting. Um, for the first 17 years of its existence, it was funded not only by government contracts, but by a lot of venture capital from, you know, Palo Alto, people like Mark Andreessen, who's, you know, pretty much like one of the more reactionary, warmongering people around. I mean, all these guys want to go to war with China. They really are pushing for that. Eric Schmidt, people like that from Eric's from Google, they want to go to war with China. At least they seem to believe that the United States will win a war with China, which is ludicrous. But um, the effect of it is that they get a lot of contracts by pumping up the militarism in popular politics and in their lobbying, which is really pervasive. So Palantir, interestingly enough, it never made a profit for a really long time. It was constantly going back to its investors who would put in literally hundreds of millions of dollars, and consequently, it could take a yearly loss on its um, on its books. it could say that it was spending more than it was taking in, which meant it didn't have to pay any taxes. Because these guys, they don't like to pay taxes. These oligarchs are totally against taxes, and they will do anything to avoid that, which is like really strange because they're all billionaires. So what do they care? A billion here, a billion there. But no, they didn't even want to let a penny go. So when Palantir went public in 2020, they had to start filing annual disclosures with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which means that you can actually see somewhat about what they're doing. And I won't go into the details on it right now. It's all in the article about, who they were contracting with worldwide to make surveillance and intelligence software models that fit into the hardware that Anduril was doing. By point of clarification, I have to say that the software that Palantir created, which is pretty good at what it does, sits on top of vast troves of data and finds patterns and categories and makes some type of algorithmic sense out of for example, the National Security Agency scoops up uh, billions of data points every minute and stores them in these data servers in Nevada and elsewhere, and no human being or not even 10,000 human beings could possibly keep track of what's going on. So Palantir's software actually, um, if properly instructed by its masters, of course, will go in and find things like, oh, show me all the black people that went through this traffic light in the last year, something like that. And its software is very good at finding the type of targets that its training data has biased it to find. Because the problem with AI as we know it today, which is large language models, generative AI, the chats, is that in order to train them so they can do what Palantir's does. Now, Palantir's model is somewhat narrow. It takes what is called a foundation model, which is trained on everything on the internet, Wikipedia, Reddit, Common Crawl, Facebook, Twitter, trained on this vast swamp of idiocy that we call the internet, which allows it to make next word or next image predictions. And the problem with using these foundation models is that they hallucinate, they confabulate a lot. I won't go into all the details on it, but anybody that's following this knows that even the model that GPT-5 that came out yesterday or the day before from OpenAI, which is supposed to be artificial general intelligence on the way to superintelligence, is actually a step backwards. I mean, it's almost laughable in its inability to present facts, not to mention truth, because these models know nothing about truth. So let me go back to where I started a little bit. The chats, the large language models, are just the latest iteration of artificial intelligence, which has been around since World War II. I mean, the wonderful socialist-minded Norbert Wiener at MIT back in the 40s worked on the bomb site mechanism for the B-17s that incinerated cities in Europe and Japan, and regretted it later. But that was a kind of analog version of artificial intelligence, which got the whole thing going. And Weiner was a pathbreaker, and he coined the word cybernetics, which is cyber is Greek for steers person, and wrote like some remarkable books about cybernetics and humanity and socialism and politics in the 50s that were really, really popular, and they were intelligent. I mean, maybe people were more intelligent in the 1950s. I'm not sure it would be such a big seller right now, because actually had to work a little bit to follow some of what he was saying. But he also wrote a book about calling the whole thing a golem. In that sense, he utilized the Jewish tradition, the religious tradition that speaks of the golem, which is a human-like entity that is made from clay, and you write the word of God on a shem, a piece of paper, and you put it in the golem's mouth, and then you can control it. But if the shem falls out, then the golem goes berserk and starts destroying everything inside, like Godzilla or the United States Empire. And he was pretty freaked out by what he had helped to create. Now, since then, there's been all these different types of programming modalities that have been called artificial intelligence. They're not any of them intelligent in the sense of the human brain. There's no real correlation between how the neurons in the human or animal brains work and how the neural nets in computers work. That's a whole subject, but it's a great marketing ploy to try and convince people that computers can be intelligent in the same way that humans that have evolved over, billions of years of life forms taking shape all the way from cyanobacteria to now, process information. There's no correlation really, but they have everybody thinking that there is, especially, and I'll just digress to say this, with the large language models, very cleverly anthropomorphized people are believe that they're human or equivalents to human, and people are using them as therapists, and they're depending on them for friendship in this vastly alienated society, sadly. But they're not human, they're not intelligent, and they're not your friend. They're just prediction machines. They're basically glorified search engines. So, um, in the first One Ring to Rule Them All uh, story, I detail all of what I just talked about a little bit. And then I talk about antitrust laws because the subhead was Silicon Valley plan to conquer the world with the AI weapons. Can we do anything about it? And from a certain point of view, yeah, we could do something about it. The antitrust laws, the Sherman Antitrust Act and related trust laws that were passed to curb the excesses of J.P. Morgan and the turn of the 19th century oligarchs that controlled the oil and transportation train industries. Those laws that broke apart like Standard Oil, thanks to muckrakers and others. But mostly they broke them apart, not so much because of the muckrakers, but because they were fucking up capitalism, right? It was getting in the way of um, people being able to come up and make new inventions because the monopolies were grabbing up everything, which is actually kind of what's happening now. And Lena Khan, who was the head of the Federal Trade Commission appointed by the genocidal maniac Joe Biden, actually she wrote a really path-breaking paper about Amazon, some 2017, I think, and then used that as the model for her policies at the FTC. And basically, she said that it's kind of ridiculous to think that we can break up monopolies after they're already big monopolies. Microsoft is the case in point. I mean, famously, Microsoft was sued in 1999 by the Department of Justice, trying to break its stranglehold on all of IT, and the judge did break it up, but then it was reversed by an appeals court. Those are usually highly politicized types of decisions. And it was basically given just a slap on their wrist. And Lena Khan's argument was that it's too late once they're that big. You have to get them closer to their birth. So I made the argument, and other people made the argument, like from in my story, for like people from Electronic Frontier Foundation, stuff like that, that now is the time to strangle Palantir and Doril and hundreds of other little companies that are in the orbit of Peter Thiel and Musk and Andreessen and these other oligarchs who were kind of black holes sucking in, venture capital to finance what largely end up being militarily oriented ventures because, and here's the dirty little secret, I suppose. Like I said, Palantir was not making any money because it was spending more than it was taking in. And when it finally started to make a little bit of money, it was because it got government contracts. It didn't get, well, we have to admit somebody here. It didn't get uh, contracts by, it didn't get money by selling products so much. I mean, for instance, OpenAI would be broke without government contracts. I mean, they've got millions and millions of users, hundreds of millions, but a lot of them aren't paying. And then there's a certain amount of competition right now between OpenAI and Anthropic and the rest of them. So their prices are too low to meet their cost of production. Um, so what we have here is an industry that has become increasingly dependent upon government subsidies in the form of military contracts, which means that the companies are increasingly militarizing their outlooks. And you can see the evidence of that in the fact that OpenAI and Google and Anthropic and a bunch of other similar IT organizations, when they came into being, said they would not work in military and intelligence realms. And then, especially in the last, since Trump was elected, they all changed. He said, well, actually, we will because we're patriots and national security is more important to us. But actually, the reason they wanted to do it is because they're going broke and they need the money. And not only have they turned to the Department of Defense and other federal agencies to fund their otherwise very jeopardized industries, they're reaching out to the Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, the petrostates, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and other sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East to get these vast injections of capital to help them build data centers because they don't have the money. I mean, they're they're basically floating on what Marx called fictitious capital. There's very little actual production activity going on with these large language models, with the chats that everybody's been using. That's why, in preparation for this, I picked up my Capital, right? And I went to the uh, part four, the chapter on machinery in modern industry. And, it points out very succinctly that surplus value and profit do not arise from the machine itself. It only arises from the expropriation of the surplus value created by the labor power of those who work with it. So, you know, people fear that the chats are going to replace jobs, right? Well, I don't think so because for two reasons. One, they're not good at what people do. I mean, that's just there's so many studies coming out now. I mean, business is running away from the chats. They're not good at customer service. They're good at some narrow things like finding some patterns in spending trends and things like that. But they're not really capable of replacing what humans do because humans are much more complex and intuitive and cued into the environment and context in which we thrive and or don't thrive. Um, so if the chats were able to put vast numbers of people out of work, they would basically be committing suicide for the corporations because they would be diminishing the possibility of them obtaining the surplus value that they need to meet their cost of production. And reading Marx was really fun when I was doing that yesterday because you might as well be talking about the chats in a way because a lot of people, when they think about the chats, they think about just software. No, the chats really are hardware. They're really the data centers. I mean, these data centers that are proliferating madly like tulip mania around the world are these incredible machines that suck up incredible amounts of electricity and water to cool their heated activities. Um, and that machinery is where all of your queries to your chat GPT or your Grok, your fascistic Grok are being processed. And that's, a lot of the constant capital that's embodied in that has been sucked from not only people that built the hardware, but also by the people largely in the so-called third world or the underdeveloped countries or whatever, that are being paid, slightly above starvation wages to review all the data streams in, say, Facebook or the queries that are going through the chats for ultraviolence and for pedophilia and rape and stuff like that. There's a number of great studies and books that have been written over the last 3 years or so, showing how these Silicon Valley corporations are exploiting and causing huge trauma for thousands and thousands of workers in Southeast Asia that are hired to make decisions in reviewing the data that the chats are unable to make, because the chats are just mimicking. They're what Emily Bender famously called stochastic parrots. They're basically this kind of predictive, random, quasi-random association of data that has already been stored in its memory banks, and it's just parroting back uh, what it was informed with, which was simply connections of words to one another or connections of pieces of images. So you've got this problem that I started to cover in my second article, was called the Stargate fiasco, which starts with, the day after Trump was inaugurated. He had Sam Altman from OpenAI and Larry Ellison from Oracle and this guy, Misama Sun from SoftBank, and some others in the Oval Office or someplace, talking about how they're going to put $500 billion into creating data centers. None of which has actually happened and probably won't be happening, because SoftBank is this kind of quasi-fraudulent organization that made a bunch of money some years ago by a few lucky bets, but since then has been criticized extensively for incompetence and literally for defrauding its investors. And since Trump's announcement, there has been no data centers made by OpenAI and SoftBank. In fact, there's no evidence that they've even created a corporation that is capable of doing that. So what we see here is this attempt to, like I said, suck in capital from the Middle East and sovereign wealth funds to subsidize these U.S. run organizations that do not have enough money. They're not making enough money. They're not attracting enough revenue to cover their cost of production. Um, they're pulling this stuff in, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be successful in that. Now, there's a couple of metaphors for that, I suppose. One is this notion that is promoted a lot, scaling. You've probably heard of that. If we train this chats with enough data, they will get smarter and smarter. Well, actually, there's tons of studies showing, especially in the last year, that it's the opposite. The more data you give them, the stupider they get, which for reasons that we could go into, but it's because there's a lot of contradictions embodied in the data. There's a lot of, obviously, social biases, but they're also predictive mechanisms. They have no sense of true or false, and they can't. They're congenitively incapable of distinguishing truth from false, because they're simply uh, electrons, right? And one of the reasons that the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds are putting, billions of dollars into this and getting Microsoft, who's embedded in all this, and OpenAI and others, to promise to build data centers in the deserts that they own, is because of the military applications of these data centers. In the coming wars that are being prepared using artificial intelligence, as I argue in my story that came after the Stargate fiasco, it's called AI Battlespace: Weaponizing the 5G Internet of Things. These wars can take place inside data centers, right? They can also take place inside the millions of refrigerators and toasters and smartphones and other devices that are permeate throughout our urban and rural environments in this 5G internet, which is coming into being. I can explain that later if anybody wants. But there's a lot of contradictions with that. But the thing is that AI wars will be fought inside the electromagnetic spectrum. And since the wars, the ability to control satellites and hyperglide missiles and B-52s and AI-driven drones, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all these with things which are being manufactured and deployed in the Ukraine and elsewhere, uh, and not to very good effect, actually. The ability to use these is dependent upon their access to the electromagnetic spectrum, which has brought forth something I cover a lot in my stories here, and we'll continue, the so-called Joint All Awareness Domain Command and Control System, the JDAC. And the JDAC is this like what they call a glass pane, supposed to be a common operating picture drawing information from satellites and sail drones that are covering the ocean. Sail drones are really interesting. They're solar powered, they're AI driven, and they're incredible spy mechanisms like surfboards that can go anywhere, and there are thousands of them out there. So it's that combined with, literally, Rand, and I relate to Rand reports in this thing talking about how wars in Europe, AI wars in Europe will be utilizing cell phone towers and your kitchen equipment to be able to transmit the information that it needs to the weapons it needs to be acting at light speed. And so one of the problems with this is that the further a data center is from the field of battle, the longer it takes for the information to make it from the sensor to the data center and then back to the weapon, right? Now we're talking nanoseconds here, but that's significant. I mean, on Wall Street, people make millions of dollars with nanosecond gaps between, trades. So the militaries recognize that no, we don't want to have a data center in the United States to fight a war in the Middle East or in China, because China will have data centers that are closer to its weapons systems and they will be faster than us. So we have to put data centers closer to China or to the Middle East. So that's one reason that they've combined with these oligarchs in the Middle East to put these data centers there, is because, of course, the Middle East is terribly roiling with imperialist wars right now. And a lot of it is AI driven and operated, especially in the surveillance mechanisms. So the closer the data center is to the field of battle, or the so-called battle space, which they call it now. They don't call them soldiers anymore, by the way. They call them war fighters. The closer that the data center is, then the faster your kill chain is going to be able to operate, right? So you've got all these contradictions that the New York Times and the rest of the freaking corporate media never talk about, or very seldom even allude to. These contradictions with the 5G spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum, which is a real problem for the United States because it's to make a really short story about it. The United States military took over the gigahertz band, 3 to 5 gigahertz in the United States in the spectrum. It took it over and excluded the cell phone tower, the cell phone companies from operating in that. It's called the Goldilocks zone. And it's called the Goldilocks zone because it's the one place in the electromagnetic spectrum where you get a kind of moderation of two contradictions, in that the narrower your wave band, between the peaks and valleys, the more information it can contain. But it's easier it is to stop, like with a wall or with a jammer. And then the longer the waveform, the less information it has, but it can penetrate like oceans, and that's how we communicate with nuclear submarines. It's very long form ELFs, right? So the short story is that the military wants to dominate this Goldilocks zone in the United States, but the cell phone providers want it desperately, and they've been trying to get it for a number of years now. And it's a battle that nobody writes about in the mainstream media, but it's really intense. And The military is freaked because the rest of the world, is using Chinese infrastructure in the Goldilocks zone. So if we go to war, uh, and our equipment is not prepared to fight in the Goldilocks zone abroad, we'll get, you know, we being the United States, not me really. I'm more of an internationalist. The United States will lose speed. And then the reverse happens inside the United States, in that, especially with this Golden Dome thing, this big boondoggle that they're talking about, um, where if they're not able to stay inside the Goldilocks zone here, then they're going to lose their abilities here. So it's a playoff between international and national um, and wavelength forms in terms of speed in battle that's going to be taking place inside data centers, which of course then become ground zero for nuclear strikes, right? So you don't really want a data center in your neighborhood, not to mention it sucks up all the water and raises your electricity bill. It's also going to vaporize you if things come to that. So that's just a little taste of that AI battle space article. And then the next one was the problem with AI war games, which uh, there are war games that have been run by Rand and the Center for New American Security and the Department of Defense and stuff like that, using AIs. Uh, Show us that left to their own devices, the AIs almost inevitably go and towards nuclear war and launch uh, nuclear strikes. I mean, famously, the Chat GPT. So yeah, we have the weapons. Why shouldn't we use them? Sounds like Trump, right? But Trump is maybe smarter than the Chat GPT, I hope. So the problem with war games is something that is really interesting to look at. And then that tied into my article that came out most recently in July called "The AI Nuclear War Dead Hand," which is like quite remarkable. I don't know anybody else that's really reporting on this. The chats being used to run the nuclear command and control and communication system, the so-called NC3, which basically operates our nuclear weapons system. The ration artificial intelligence has always been embedded in the NC3. I mean, going back to the 1950s, right? But this hasn't operated at the same type of speed and with the same type of anthropomorphic cultural content that we're seeing now. So we're seeing literally ChatGPT and Grok, the fascist Grok, and Anthropic Claude. These are now being used not only in the NC3 but across all the military enterprises to advise commanders on the shape of the battle space and what the most recommended countermeasures are and stuff like that. And the rationale behind it is that there's so much happening that only machine learning, only the chats are able to instantly grasp everything and come up with solutions. So they're taking the humans out of the loop, as it were. And obviously, this is not a good idea because what are the chats trained on? They're not trained on Gandhi or on nuclear freeze materials. They're trained on military materials and how to fight nuclear wars. And so that's going to be their bias. There's a lot of people in the military that are freaked out about this. I report on some of this in my last story, the AI nuclear war dead hand. And I don't think it's actually going to happen for a number of reasons. One of them being that this JDAC that I talked about, as well as all these other AI-driven projects, fortunately have come up against the anarchy of capitalism, which means that each of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the intelligence community, they all have their own contractors, their favored contractors. So you've got like Amazon Web Services is mostly serving, I think, the Army, and Oracle's like serving the Navy, and their systems are not necessarily compatible. In fact, they're not compatible because that's how also capitalism works. It wants you to buy their product, not the other guy's product. So they make it so that they don't interface. And that's good for humanity that these things don't interface. They cannot, as I show very clearly in this series so far, they are technologically and scientifically incapable of making this common operating picture by which to fight their large and small wars, whether they're conventional or nuclear. And that means that they won't be under the illusion, hopefully, uh, that they can turn over the invasion of China, which they do want to do, hopefully they won't, to the chat to order to render orders upon military orders upon in at light speed, um, because the chats are not knowledgeable about the impacts of nuclear war and what that means, nuclear winter, stuff like that. They're not taking that into consideration. They're taking a whole other predictive mechanism into consideration, and they're actually weighting it on a prediction that it has actually nothing to do with the survival or the non-survival of life. So, my next piece is going to be on so-called human machine teaming, which is really interesting. How the military is increasingly uh, uh, embedding humans and machines together, but they're definitely able to show giving the AIs the power to override the humans if they think the humans have become unstable. So there you have it. That's 45 minutes. I'm open for questions. I see there's a lot in the chat. I don't know. How do you want to deal with this?
Okay. Thank you, Peter. We're going to have a short break for announcements, followed by questions and answers. Um, if you would, if you do have a question, please go down to the reactions button in your Zoom window and raise your hand. We'll call on everybody as best we can. We want to remind everyone to please keep your questions short on the topic at hand and ask one question at a time to allow everyone to participate. Also, keep in mind that this is a comradely forum for political discussion, so please show respect for other participants and the moderator of today's session. We have a couple of very interesting, there we go. We have a couple of very interesting sessions coming up. Next week, we have speaker Jerry Condon, who will be speaking on 80 years after the US bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Are we on the verge of another nuclear war? Jerry Condon is a Vietnam era veteran and war resister, former president and current national board member of Veterans for Peace, and chair of their Golden Rule Peace Boat Committee. The Golden Rule ship is currently on a month-long visit to San Francisco Bay Area, highlighting the anniversary of the atomic bombings and the growing danger of nuclear war. In 2 weeks, on August 31st, our session will be Migration as Economic Imperialism. Speaking will be Emmanuel Ness, who is a professor of political science at Brooklyn College in CUNY and a visiting professor of sociology of the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. Emmanuel is a trade union organizer in the US and a labor activist in the Global South. He's the editor-in-chief of the journal Labor and Society, the chair of the New York Peace Council, and the International Committee of the PSC CUNY, a labor union representing the faculty. So we have two very good sessions coming up. You can sign up for email notifications for future programs, including the link to join the programs at our website, icssmarks.org. Okay, so let's see. We have quite a few questions coming up. Again, we'll try to keep your questions short. Paulina, if you could do the timing on that, that would be great. Or
Yeah,
I could do it.
I do that.
Okay, so let's start with Mike H. If you would raise your hand, followed by Janet. So Mike H, and let me go ahead and change the setting to let everybody unmute. And Mike H, please unmute and ask your question.
Hey, thank you, Alan. The question I have for Peter is going into the dead hand concept. So what I have heard, and I don't know the accuracy on this, is that the Soviet Union, or Russia now, claims that the Soviet Union had a dead hand mechanism. And Medvedev has threatened within the last week or two that they do have that. My question is the reliability. If some of this stuff goes back to the 50s or 60s, I don't know if they've upgraded their nuclear, but is there any way there could be a malfunction? Say something got wet or something rotted out or something like this. Is there any way that the dead hand concept could be triggered by lack of maintenance?
Well, yeah, like the entire nuclear apparatus of the United States and Russia is undergoing quote unquote modernization because it's 60, 70 years old. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of problems. And famously, the American silos in Wyoming and Montana and Idaho were shown to be working on floppy disks until quite recently. Um, the Soviet dead hand is somewhat of a misnomer. I mean, it wasn't actually what a lot of people that are aficionados of nuclear war fighting, the so-called deterrence, which is a whole other thing to talk about, but I consider deterrence to be a first strike mechanism, not a retaliatory mechanism. Um, the dead hand wasn't as automatic as there's papers that have come out recently as people were thinking that it was. It did actually have require a human agency. Um, and yeah, of course, these things can malfunction, especially in the fog of war. I mean, first of all, AIs, for example, but this applies to all computer algorithms. I mean, they have to be trained on something, right? And the only nuclear war that's been fought so far was, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That data is pretty old, so you can't train AIs on iterations of nuclear wars the way you can train them on iterations of chess or Go, for example, which are famous uh, examples of AIs supposedly being able to pass humans, although that's somewhat suspect. Um, so AIs are only as good as their training data, and since there's never been a nuclear war, there's no way to train an AI on what to do in case all the humans are wiped out, except simulations. And this is of interest because they have been training AIs on simulations, like the Unreal Engine that powers a lot of the shooter games and stuff like that. They use that type of algorithmic platform to simulate nuclear wars and other types of conflicts and military excursions to generate possible measures and countermeasures and stuff like that. But, of course they will malfunction. I mean, first of all, once the nukes go off, you've got the electromagnetic pulse is going to fry every electronic circle on a circuit on a planet. So your dead hand's going to be fried, not that it really exists. And we don't, to be clear, my article on the dead hand, we don't have a dead hand here. They just there's forces in the United States governing apparatus that want to have a dead hand, but they don't really want it because it will work. They want it because there's money to be made from doing it. All this, follow the money. Most of this tech is bullshit in terms of military applications, but there's an incredible amount of money involved, and that's why it's being promoted. Next question. Thank you.
Okay, next is Janet, followed by Kit. So Janet, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Peter, for your presentation and for your work. I'm wondering if you've heard of Glenn Medder, Meder. I've been following him on his privacy project to learn about de-Googling smartphones and protecting computers. In addition to talking about the militarization of AI and weaponry, he also talks about related issues, including how our devices are being surveilled by the apps we use by basically capturing our consumer data and using it to feed into social credit systems to control our behavior, basically a weapon against us. His description of an SCS is as follows. A social credit system is a mechanism where individuals are rated based on whether behavior conforms to social norms, laws, or government directives. In fact, it is digital slavery. And although admittedly anti-communist, he has given examples of how China already has active social credit systems and says the West is not far behind. Can you talk about them and their dangers?
Well, yeah, I mean, what's happening with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province in China is probably the wet dream of imperialism going forward. I mean, there's been a lot of really good studies upon this. Is people on the so-called left. I mean, well, when we talk about left, I mean, I don't even know what that means anymore. But people will say, "Oh, you're being unfair about China. China's not doing what, the U.S. imperialism says it's doing in to the Uyghurs." But actually, they are doing it, and they've turned like there's 2 million people, and they're not the dominant ethnicity in China is Han, and they're Uyghurs. They're more like Turkmenistans, and they're Muslims. And so they've been targeted and scapegoated by the Chinese manufacturing system, which, initially it was able to do a lot of cheap manufacturing for Western firms in Shanghai and along the coast. But as that developed, a whole middle class arose and a managerial class, and people became less willing to do the shitty kind of work you have to do to put Apple, phones together. Um, and so the Chinese ruling class started migrating a lot of that labor uh, e- east toward or west towards Zhejiang province, which is way up in the northwest of China, and they have Apple and Google and all the usual suspects have worked with the Chinese intelligence community to basically turn the entire province into a model of surveillance and social control. I mean, people have cameras inside their houses, inside their bedrooms, apparently, and they're arrested for saying things inside their houses and put into basically what amount to forced labor camps. So that is an extreme case. Uh, Gaza, of course. I mean, that was the most heavily surveilled entity on the planet prior to October 7th, 2 years ago. Um, which means parenthetically that there's no way that the Israeli IDF didn't know exactly what was going on there and wasn't aware. I mean, the whole place is just completely surveilled, and they knew about the tunnels and all the rest of it, of course, and it's playing right into their hands, right, as they turn Gaza into Trump land. Um, but the problem, which this guy you're talking about, I don't know him, but he sounds right on to me, is that these are models for how the imperialism wants to, control the populace of the world using IT and AI. Not just the large language models, but the type of artificial intelligence that preceded that, and then another type of artificial intelligence called symbolic logic, and other iterations that will be forthcoming, in advanced computation. Yeah, it's all about social control and making money, right? And ensuring that you can control your population so you can make more money. I think it's a good idea for people to look at what's going on in with the Uyghurs as an example of what could go on here.
Okay, next is Kit, followed by Roger Harris. So, Kit, please go ahead.
Yes, Peter, thank you very much. I do hate AI's ability to manipulate, and I just think that the whole trend that we're moving into is so dangerous for all of us. Besides Peter Thiel and Palantir, can you comment more about the tech bros? What are their names and when they were brought into the leadership of the military, they were sworn in at a very high rank without any military experience, which is unprecedented. And the big question is, how do we stop these guys? Thank you.
Well, yeah, I reported in one of my articles, but it was widely reported as well that I think it was executives at OpenAI and Oracle and some other firm, five of them altogether, were given commissions in various armed services and then put in charge of procurement, uh, which means they get to carry a gun in get classified clearances so that they have more information about what the procurement modalities are that they can take advantage of. Um, and the tech bros, as it were, and this includes Eric Schmidt, Thiel, Musk, Andreessen, somebody that you've never heard of, who I will be writing about pretty soon, is one of the most important ones, called Gilman Louie. And they've interpenetrated the federal government through lobbying and through organizations like the Federation of American Scientists for many, many years, um, seizing all sorts of power within the bureaucracy. So it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen just with Trump. As far as stopping it, well, like I said, if we had an operating system that could deal with antitrust issues, then that was one way to slow it down. But I don't think it can be stopped. It's very interesting that there's attempts to regulate artificial intelligence in Europe, for example. They spent like several years um, arguing about what kind of rules and regulations to put on artificial intelligence and especially large language models, and then they announced that they have this wonderful set of regulations that Meta, which is Zuckerberg, won't sign, but others have. But they're pretty toothless. But most amazingly and most disturbingly to me is that they completely exclude any military application regulation. They say military is up to you. We're not going to look into that. And that's where all the dangers really are, because they have these so-called kinetic abilities, right? Um, so in terms of, rules and regulations, I think they have to be much more draconian. They have to be modeled on whatever type of reformist activities have been moderately successful in the past in curbing, monopoly capitalism and imperialist excesses, as it were. Um, but I think, personally, fundamentally, I think it's going to take a complete reworking of our political economy uh, for us to get through this without much more suffering and possibly extinction, because I think that's where it's headed. We're ruining the earth, and it's not just AI. It's capitalism. It's monopoly capitalism and imperialism that is doing this, and this is what a lot of people don't want to talk about. But that's what it is. It's not just about regulating, you know, not just about trying to put like a leash on a rabid bear. I mean, this is a Marxist forum, right? So there's obviously has to be upheavals, uh, dialectical, of course, from many, many sectors of society in order to rein in this terror.
Okay, next is Roger, followed by Citizen One. So Roger, please go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you, Peter, for your presentation. Very interesting. Um, you spoke mostly about the dark side of AI, but as you said, it's here to stay. And maybe you could comment a little bit of some useful uses for AI for activists. How can we take advantage of a technology that has, some caveats, but it's also something that we can use? I know I write for a number of left blog sites. I find it a useful editing tool and research as well. So perhaps you might talk a little bit about how it could be used as a tool for activists.
Well, first of all, I don't necessarily agree that it's here to stay. I mean, this is the mantra that's put forth, the standard lobbying um, uh, uh, aphorism that's put forth about AI, especially like in California, where the legislature had passed some regulations that were then vetoed by Gavin Newsom. The argument of the industry has been, well, if we if you regulate us, then we won't be able to keep inventing things and advancing. And in the same breath, they say AI is inevitable. It depends on, it's just hypocritical marketing crap. It depends on what you're talking about with AI. I mean, like I said before, large language models are the latest iteration. I don't think they have any particular lasting use. I think they're failing. I mentioned the GPT failure that came out in the last couple of days, showing that scaling is actually doing the opposite of what you think. Um, in terms of what they're good at, oh, something happened with my little screen here. You guys still there?
Yeah.
In terms of
Uh,
what they're good at, there's a claim that they're good at like assessing mammograms for signs of cancer. Well, and there's a Nobel Prize was given for alpha protein folding, right? Well, in both of those instances, the ability of the large language models to do that was based on their training data. And the training data had already given them the scaffolding for success. It wasn't like they went into some kind of unknown data wilderness and then extracted or recognized patterns or were able to find truth and falsehoods about any statements. No, they just made a series of predictions based on the data that they had. And in terms of fold and some breast cancer mammography, um, uh, they were already set up by the content of the training data to be successful, as it were. But neither of them have been tested outside of the data sets that they were given, and they can't possibly deal with that because AI's in its current iteration of large language models cannot deal with uncertainty. That's why they're a failure, an abject failure in war, is because war is full of uncertainties. But AIs cannot deal with uncertainty or with situations that they haven't encountered in their training data. Um, in terms of in terms of science, I mean, there's always papers coming out now that are very critical. It's interesting to see all the critical papers that come out, as a buttress against the corporate hype that comes out and gets most attention. I mean, there's a lot of scientists that are, including people at Apple and at Salesforce, that are saying, no, these things aren't smart. They're failing. I reference a lot of these papers in my articles. Um, but in terms of science, no. I mean, they're not ready for prime time. No scientist worth his salt would like tell an AI to go write the paper for me. Where they can be interesting is like, like I said, like search engines on steroids. They can go through like vast troves of electronic data and find patterns or things that you might faster than you can, or faster than, your Google type search can. Um, but I think we're increasingly finding that the large language models are not anywhere near capable as they're being portrayed. And Karen Ho's piece on the Empire of AI, her book that just came out a couple weeks ago, which I started reading last night, is I recommend for everybody. It's a really good cautionary tale about what goes on in AI, and OpenAI is the poster child for that. As far as how can activists use it, I always freak out when I go and I see the demonstration is going to be somewhere, and like Answer or somebody puts up a poster online, and then you're supposed to like sign up if you're going to come. Well, who the fuck wants to do that? I mean, especially like Invisible, which is like this Democratic Party front that holds like anti-King demonstrations and shit like that. They're always trying to like kind of like monetize or marketize the people that go to the demonstrations. I mean, when I go to a demonstration, I don't advertise that I'm going there necessarily. I go there to demonstrate, to protest, maybe to do civil disobedience if I want sometime. So I don't think that using machine learning or any type of computation to monitor and surveil the people that are intending to go protest being monitored and surveilling is a very good idea. Um, Now, I mean, you want to create a mailing list to, let people know whether you're doing something. Well, maybe, there's some applications there, but, already there's applications that work well enough. Um, and the point, that I go over and over again, and that science goes over and over again, is these things hallucinate. They confabulate. They essentially lie because they don't know what the truth is. So why would you want to use it? I mean, and in terms of editing, I've explored those things. I find I I've asked like ChatGPT or the Microsoft bot to summarize defense audits that are like 500 pages, and all they do is just like basically regurgitate the introduction or the abstract. You know, you can ask it some more details and it will find stuff, but you can find that without doing that. But what you do find, and I talk about this in my AI dead hand one, I asked the chat GTP if it was a good idea for the nuclear armed countries to sign the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons that, 93 countries signed back in 2017, which basically bans nuclear weapons. And it said, no, it's not a good idea because it would put the United States in too much danger. So that shows you where it was trained, right? So if you want to use these chats, just be aware that, they're not trained on Marx. They're not trained on the tradition of the last 500 years of rebellion. Thank you.
Okay, next is Citizen One, followed by Richard Wright, and we're getting close to the end, so let's try to keep questions one question at a time, keep them short. So Citizen One, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just a few very brief comments before my question. A Black friend of mine was attempted to be wooed into the Israel lobby apparatus, and he sort of went along with it, even though he was anti-Zionist. And he said that, so he had his little trip, his propaganda trip to Israel, and he said that he's been in those total surveillance video rooms overlooking Gaza, and he was so impressed, and he said, of course, they know everything that's going on in Gaza. So he believes that the Israeli government let October 7th happen so they would have a pretext to do exactly what they're doing now. The other thing is I was trying to look up this former defense analyst name in case you might know of him, Peter. But with regard to the idea of war with China, and this is something that I'll probably bring up next week when we discuss nuclear war, this defense analyst on the or former defense analyst on the PBS NewsHour, certainly no leftist rag by any means, said that if the U.S. went to war with China, a conventional war with China in the South China Seas, the U.S. would probably lose 2 aircraft carriers in a week. So I thought that was a very interesting comment. Okay, so I'm almost embarrassed to ask this next question because I'm afraid it might be too pedestrian, and but I'll try to ask it anyway. And excuse me if it is too pedestrian. But I was doing a Google inquiry about a famous basketball player, Angel Reese, who some people here at least may know of, and a simple Google inquiry, and it had mentioned 2 greatly erroneous points that I was really surprised about because, we're just talking basketball, right? And statistics are pretty easy to come by if you know where to look. But the Google AI answer said that she was the first rookie to reach 500 points in the shortest amount of time, which I knew to be wrong. And it also said that she was the first basketball player in the WNBA to reach 20 consecutive double-doubles, which I knew that was likely to be wrong. Now, very briefly, for those who don't know, a double-double is, for example...
Oh, come on, please. Citizen, it's been 3 minutes, actually, 2:50. So
yeah, what's the question?
So I was amazed that this Google AI answer could get such simple statistics so incredibly wrong. And I was
right. That's
what
it's called. It's called confabulation and hallucination. It is the Achilles heel of all AI. And you mentioned Google now has this like AI summary at the top. I always avoid it. I turn it off because 1, it's often wrong, but 2, it actually, being a journalist, we like it when people go and click on our websites and read our stuff. That shows that we have popular support or it can be monetized, and it's just defenestrating the clicks. The AI, people are believing that the AI is telling them the truth, so they don't actually have to go and read it at, Project Censored or the New York Times or wherever. So I suggest people don't pay much attention to that. And, don't trust the AI, obviously. You made the case in point why you shouldn't. What's the next question?
Okay,
It-
next up is Richard Wright. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I have to say I have mixed feelings about your presentation. Some points I agree with, and some points I do not agree with. But my question is this. You've talked about the privatization of AI, and in particular as it applies to war. My question is, you have not discussed the difference between the Russians' privatization or use of AI, nor the Chinese use of AI. Could you maybe go into those a little bit, because they have different models than what exists here? Thank you.
Yeah, Richard, I saw from the chat that you didn't necessarily agree with everything I said, which I thought was interesting regarding to the math problems. I could send you later if you want some papers that just came out, showing that what was being touted as an advanced ability to solve math problems was not that. I do recommend that people read Gary Marcus, Marcus. He's a neuroscientist and a AI scientist who's been around for 40 years, and he's got like probably the most well-read blog, as it were, or Substack on the science of this sort of thing, especially on math. Gary Marcus. Now, going back to your question about Russia and China, I haven't gone into a whole lot of that yet in my series. I probably should, but the thing that Silicon Valley oligarchs keep putting out is that we have to beat China in AI, or they're going to have advanced AI weapons and going to be able to beat us. And so there's an AI arms race. And yeah, there is, but it's led by the United States. I mean, first of all, keep this in mind, the most advanced chips are designed by NVIDIA, which is an American corporation, and manufactured by Taiwan Semiconductor, which is on the island of Taiwan, a politically disputed area, right? And the United States, using its sanctions, has forbidden NVIDIA chips to be used, its most advanced chips to be used or sold to the Chinese, thereby creating a huge black market, which they sell them anyway. Um, uh, but the Chinese are pretty much on the record as being more peace oriented in the modern day. I mean, yeah, they can be fascists at home and all that. But in their foreign policy, they've thrown out a lot of opportunities to the United States to negotiate these trade issues that have just arisen, but also a lot of that's tied to technology and to AI chip technology. And the United States is not really going along with it. I mean, they recently said, "Oh yeah, you can." The second generation of NVIDIA chips can be sold to China, and then the Chinese, like a week later, were going, "Yeah, well, these things are full of back doors. We don't actually even necessarily want them." Um, but so what's happened is that between sanctions and trying to cut China out of using the most advanced technology, I mean, the machines that make these chips were only made by like one company in the Netherlands, right? And that's dominated by the West. So the Chinese have made their own. What it's caused China to put a huge amount of capital into making its own domestic AI chip manufacturing firms and factories. And so, they keep trying to catch up to us. It's not the reverse. Um, Russia, uh, Russia is not anywhere near in the category with China and the United States. I mean, its AI industry, as far as I can tell, is uh, not competitive, and they're not even saying that it is. But I'll just give you an example of one of the malfunction points in using AI in warfare. In the Ukraine, for example, in the drone wars, in the beginning, uh, Russia and Ukraine would shoot drones at each other, thousands of them, uh, often guided by AI types of algorithms. But The problem with electromagnetic warfare is that it's really easy to jam and destroy the ability of a mechanism to communicate than it is to get around that, to design something that can't be jammed. And so all these drones are being jammed, and like maybe 1 out of 100 was getting through or whatever. So what the both sides started to do was they made drones that would extrude miles and miles of very, very spider web thin fiber optic cable, which it would go right back to like the iPhone that a soldier was using to guide the drone towards its target, and it couldn't be jammed, right? I mean, it could actually be destroyed by microwaves, and it could be blown up in all sorts of, other types of countermeasures, but it couldn't be jammed electronically anymore. Um, so you've got like in the Ukraine, it's been this vast weapons testing lab for Palantir and Anduril and for the Russians as well, and it is resulted in a real clusterfuck because, you know, they have to manufacture so many hundreds of millions of drones that in order to get any military advantage, that their industries are just being concentrated on doing that. Um, and they're not finding any real value to the large language models, as far as I know, uh, in terms of being able to get around the issue of jamming. Um, so one thing to keep in mind, because Eric Schmidt, and who wrote a book with Henry Kissinger before the war criminal died, about how we need to go to war with China to protect American industry, which is just a way for Eric Schmidt and his friends to make money. Um, you know, they have successfully managed to convince the populace here because of the complicity of the corporate media for the most part and the ignorance of most people about how this stuff works, that China is a threat to us in terms of advanced artificial intelligence. But no, it really isn't. It's been put into such a corner that, yeah, maybe it will do a Manhattan type project, as they say, inside China to make it work better, but that isn't good. That isn't a successful foreign policy. The actual and Rand actually just came out with a report on this because Rand has been changing in some interesting ways, um, uh, showing ways that we can economically uh, um, stop ruthlessly competing with China and collaborate, which I think is a very good idea. We need to collaborate both with China and with Russia, because the alternative is, since they all have nuclear war, nuclear weapons, and since we're the most aggressive entity, the United States being, us, on the planet, and the only entity that's ever actually used a nuclear weapon, I think it's to the advantage of all concerned to disarm. And disarmament means getting rid of weapons of mass destruction and the variants that are being increasingly monetized with AI. Anyway, I could like perseverate forever on this. The next question, please.
Okay, next is Peter, followed by Dr. Ku, followed by Paulina. So Peter, please go ahead. Unmute yourself. Thank you. Peter Fay, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, great. I can't wait to hear from whoever Dr. Ku is. But anyway, this is such a broad topic, and it's really hard to try and condense this into any kind of a lesson here because we're just kind of all over the place. But I'll just note that I was hoping there would be a lot more focus on how AI is actually being used in warfare today, which of course is, the battleground is Ukraine. And I think to clarify some of the questions on AI, Russian AI, which is, yeah, okay, it's behind, but they have successfully used it in drones. The difference that was described here was drones being jammed successfully by both sides, electronic jamming, and that actually led to the development of pattern recognition by Russian drones, so that when they are jammed, they can continue their path and successfully target the destination. And the proof is in the pudding. There have been hundreds and hundreds of drones in the last month or so that have been successfully hitting their targets, despite AD, by the Ukrainians. So I wouldn't write off entirely Russian AI successes, and of course the other technology, the FPV drones, which is a whole different world than the large drones that Russia's been using. Again, is overwhelmingly being successfully used by Russia, somewhat by Ukraine as well. But anyway, I wanted to just ask about the kind of overall picture you painted about kind of trying to break up monopolies of, and pointing to historical occasions where monopolies were broken up in the early 1900s successfully. You said, I would question whether that was actually a successful breakup of monopolies. There's a lot of literature that says it. They broke the corporations into separate parts that continue to operate as a monopoly. So in terms of defense corporations, the vast majority of which never actually many of them never actually were profit making until they latched on to the defense procurement industry. I don't see a whole lot of difference between the current Palantirs and everybody else. I don't see them being very different at all from all the other major defense industries that are sucking on the teat of American defense budgets. So I don't really see how any kind of what are your prospects for possibly breaking monopolies up could have any impact whatsoever. Even if they were successful, how could that possibly have any impact on their control of corporate America, or control of the deep state and everything else? I don't follow that logic of
Actually, I'm not suggesting that that is the solution. I just something that has been brought up as, a way to partially curb the rate of advance of these corporations. And as I also mentioned, I think it's going to say some much more profound social, political, economic change to actually remediate this. I don't think it's going to be remediated by capitalism. So you said something about, an overall lesson here. I mean, I tried to do my best to talk about whatever I could the time that we had, right? You can all go, you can go read the stuff too. There's a lot more there, and there's a lot of links inside what I wrote, like literally probably 100 links or more to science papers and source material and stuff like that. So you can draw your own lessons. As far as I'm concerned, the main lesson here is that we need to pay a lot more attention to military AI and a lot less attention to the latest release coming out of lying Sam Altman's mouth and the claim that large language models are more competent than they really are. Because the problem with using large language models in the military realm is that they're not working as advertised and they can't. So it's going to make it a lot more dangerous, because if you put these LLMs in charge of trying to either make decisions or make recommendations for decisions to commanders, you're going to be actually blinding them in certain ways. You're going to be giving them bad information that they can't trust, and they know that it can't be trusted, because the people in the military are very aware of what hallucinations are, and a lot of them, especially people in the front lines, don't want it. So
Okay, next is Dr. Koo, followed by Polina, and we're getting very close to the end time. We may run a few minutes over to try to get the last few people in. So, Dr. Koo, please unmute and go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask Mr. Byrne if he has been to Xinjiang. Have you been to Xinjiang, China?
No, I have not been there.
Okay, then what gives you the authority to speak about what you said about Xinjiang? And if possible, give me the links. I'll be happy. If you
I'll
can
be
give
happy
me the
to.
links.
Yeah,
But wait.
if you
Hold
want
on
to
a second.
email me, I'd be happy to send you the
Okay,
list of
okay.
books and papers. And I've actually interviewed people that have been there and spent a lot of time there.
Okay,
myself been there
wait.
personally.
But I don't want any links from Adrian Zenz or the Uyghur website or the so-called, Uyghur.
Yeah,
And
Zen's got a problem. Zen is like an anti-communist. I understand that.
yeah, but the other
There's a
thing,
lot of other people that have been there and that have written about it that aren't agendized like Zen.
yeah, but I've been to Xinjiang. I've been to Urumqi, I've been to Kashgar, and I don't see any of the things that you're talking about. So I feel a little bit outraged that I felt that if you haven't been to Xinjiang and you speak with such authority on this kind of thing, and by the way, I've also been to Xinjiang, which is Tibet. And so I just feel that for people who haven't visited there and felt that they could just say what they want to say, and even if you read papers, it doesn't matter. Go check it out. Go check it out yourself and see for yourself whether what you said about Xinjiang and about the Uyghur or about Tibet or whatever, see if it is true.
Okay.
Really, just check
I'll
it
go
out.
there. Sure.
Okay.
Okay, next is
just a challenge that
Paulina.
I'll throw it
Yeah.
to you. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Next is Paulina. Please unmute.
Yes, thanks. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, well, let me start over. A comment and a question. I'm wondering what models, large language models, the DeepSeek, the Chinese AI uses, because I actually asked a question about the Israeli occupation of Palestine, and I got a bland answer that seemed to regurgitate whatever the scraped Zionist version of the internet gives you. I don't want to go into details. That's just one. And so, if you know what kind of, if it's different, the language, the data that DeepSeek is based on or not. But I was wondering about 5G. What do you ascribe the movement against 5G too? Is that connected? I have my suspicions that maybe there is some kind of a psychological warfare going on with the domain over 5G technology, and people are scared, and that's being fed, I would assume, by the intelligence services, but I don't know the science behind it. So anything you can tell would be interesting. Thank you.
Well, one of my articles does go into a lot of that, but not what you're asking about. So thanks for asking. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about 5G, like there are about vaccines, and that doesn't mean that we must still understand what 5G entails. And it literally is the Internet of Things, right? Now, the Pentagon has a concept called the Internet of Military Things, which I report on in my article on 5G, in which they actually include your household devices as part of their overarching intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and warfighting modality. So a lot of times conspiracy theories like, 9/11 type conspiracy theories or, whatever, serve a purpose of obfuscating what's really going on. And like with 9/11, right? I don't believe for one second that the United States went in there and planted thermite bombs, but they certainly ignored the intelligence that allowed it to happen, and they were aware those guys were here, right? So with 5G, it's not going to fry our brains and shit like that so much. The problem is that there's this, like I said, huge struggle going inside North America between the Department of Defense, the military, and the Chamber of Commerce about who gets to dominate that's Goldilocks aspect of the spectrum here, which is important. But that said, the military has already created the apparatuses to use the 5G networks, which are more advanced in Europe than they are here, for military purposes. And I think that's pretty interesting. The flip side of that is that it makes it easier for forces that can marshal this type of intelligence to spoof the enemy. I mean, if you get your, household appliances to send incorrect data to the advancing Russians or the advancing Americans or whatever, then that's going to corrupt their intel, right? And that's always been the the huge Achilles heel on using AI in intelligence and in weapon systems is that you can completely spoof a picture of a dog by changing one pixel, and then people will the AI will think it's an elephant, right? And the spoofing means that you can do this if you're, spoofing your enemy, which we are doing, and which is being done to us, being the United States, constantly. Which means that a lot of the large language models that are embedded into the intelligence systems are considered to be actual enemy threats because you can't tell if they're spoofed or not. Is that this advance? This is very interesting. This advance in technology carries with it its own Achilles heels, and that's always been the case with military technology. People find ways around the killing mechanism, except for maybe the atomic bomb. And there are a lot of links in the article I wrote about 5G, and hopefully that will answer your question further than I was able to.
Okay, Lucy, again, we're over time now, so let's try to keep the questions short. Lucy, followed by Sharon, and then James, and then we're going to cut. So Lucy, please go ahead.
Peter, thank you for your presentation. I'm sorry I missed most of it, but the question I have is about DeepSeek. Like Pauline, I've had some interaction with it, and in fact, I downloaded it into my desktop. I actually love DeepSeek. In fact, I renamed him after my dearest pet, so it's a he for me anyway. But anyway, the interchange I have with him has never shown to me that he was deliberately lying or trying to fool me or trying to keep me in the dark about anything. I'm not sure why people seem so well. Maybe because you're talking about the AI created here in this country and used in this country. I'm more afraid of Google and Facebook and YouTube than I am about DeepSeek. So could it be?
To the question?
Yeah, no, I'm just making a statement about it. I'm sorry, I don't really have a question.
You want a response?
If you want to.
I think it's really dangerous and troublesome that you can use words like love and him when talking about a computer program. I mean, these things are very cleverly anthropomorphized.
Let me just say one thing. Look, I know that he's a program. I know he's just a bunch of lines of code. I know what code is. I write some code. That's why I have him, because I want him to check my code. And he helps me debug my stuff.
Great, and that's a good use of large language model.
Yeah, he has many other uses as well, but I mean, among the things I can use him for. But
however, I wouldn't automatically trust whatever it comes up with.
I'm not at all afraid of him surveilling me.
But he is. Absolutely. All the prompts and answers that you put into DeepSeek are going back to the main servers in order to keep training the modality.
Yes,
I mean, all the information. Every time somebody asks a chat a question, that and the answers are used as training data. So, be aware of that.
I am aware of that.
Okay.
I mean, now, unless they want to know what kind of underwear I wear. I mean, what the fuck does that matter? Why does it get American people so upset about that? Is their privacy so precious or what?
Oh, that's a good question. Personally, I think everything should be public, including the board meetings and the IC.
All right, we just have a couple more. So Sharon and then James, and we're going to have to end. So Sharon, please go ahead and keep it short.
Well, I'd like to point out that this meeting is being recorded on the cloud. I have two questions, two related things having to do with how does it work? So can you take a course in computer science a department at a college to learn how to code or to create AI, or do you have to work for one of these companies to learn how to do that? And a related question is, I know someone who works for a small company that he says has software that can recognize people by the way they use the keyboard. So it's a security thing that they market to, for example, a big bank. So a big bank has that software, and they can then see if it's really you logging on or somebody else using your password, right? And where does that software reside? Does it need one of these data centers, or can it just be on a server? Since it seems to me it is AI, if I understand correctly what they do.
First, question about courses. Yeah, you can take courses. You can take free courses, and it'll give you all sorts of information about elementary types of programming, and then you can take it as advanced as you want. I mean, it's a growing sector in education. Um, the software is obviously on your device, but that's just an interface. It's called an API, and the activity is actually taking place in the data centers. Um, and one of the issues I think that's really important is that there's some papers that came out recently that really contesting the notion that the chats are good at coding. They can do some things, but they're very problematic with things become more complex than what they're trained on. But more troubling, I think, is this whole notion of cognitive offload, where people are using computation, but AIs, they've always been doing it to some extent, but it's gotten a lot more popular in the past 2 years, where people are like offloading their cognitive processes to the AI instead of actually doing the research or thinking it through. They're just asking chat to solve it for them, and 20% of the time it's confabulated, and usually it's based on sources that are biased and culturally. I mean, the internet is a Western thing for the most part. And the biases in it are Western biases. Obviously, in China and other places like that, which have contained the internet more, the biases are Chinese biases, ruling class biases, whatever. But I think people need to be really cautious about offloading their thinking processes to OpenAI and Microsoft and Anthropic and the rest of these corporations, because they're not our friends.
If I could just
Okay,
clarify
just
my
now,
last
we
question.
got to move on. It's
Okay.
time to. Next is James. This will be the last question. Go ahead, James.
Thank you. Glad to hear your talk. I think the level of propaganda and hype around AI to convince us it's going to save the planet is rather amusing. It's just, I don't know who's buying into that stuff. And I tend to agree that the whole thing is about profitability for Silicon Valley. What I wanted to ask you about is if you looked into quantum computing, it's another one of these hypes that is being generated that we got to do this quantum computing. It looks like another, profit-making venture out of Silicon Valley, which probably has very little, if any, practical implications other than like for breaking some kind of code, when you've encrypted something. So if you can say a word, few words.
I actually know a fair amount about quantum computing. I've written books on quantum mechanics, and in the military. If you go to my website, you can see them. And I've been following the past 2 years, amalgamation of AI with quantum computing. It's technologically, it's nowhere yet, and the problem is the same now with this that has always been the problem with quantum computation, is that in order for humans to take advantage of the information that is stored inside a qubit, a quantum bit, as it were, which doesn't store information just in zeros and ones, but it's got what are called superpositions, so it can store a vast amount more information than binary allows it to. In order to take advantage of that, the collection of particles in the forming the qubit have to remain stable for a period of time. But particles in quantum mechanics are unstable. They're constantly changing and collapsing their wave functions and stuff like that. And this is, thought by many to be an intractable problem, but there's a fair amount of money that's been thrown into it recently because people are claiming that advances in quantum computation will make something called quantum sensing possible, which means that you can have some kind of device lowered into the oceans that will allow you to detect enemy submarines and stuff like that. I think it's not going to happen anytime soon, nor is it a good idea that any of these technologies become militarized. I mean, this is a Marxist forum. I mean, I have to frankly say I'm a little disappointed in the questions because people are talking about stuff you can find for the most part by just reading the New York Times. I mean, I think the more pressing question is, what does this mean for social change, and how what are the weaknesses that are shown by this mass hallucination that people are buying into that is also being weaponized against our interests, and how it's being used by the ruling classes to enrich themselves while impoverishing others. I mean, this AI industry is just destroying economies in undeveloped countries, as it were, and harming people throughout the world. So all this shit about us being able to like find Google answers easier and stuff like that is not to me something that is of any interest. I'm much more interested in what the inherent social economic problems are of the AI system as we know it, and how we might fight it, not use it and become part of it.
Very good. Thank you very much, Peter. This is a Marxist Forum, and we appreciate the educational content that you presented today. This was a very rich session, lots of hands, lots of questions, and again, we really appreciate it. Please come back next week for our session on the atomic bombing of Japan and the danger of nuclear war today. You go to our website, icssmarks.org, sign up for email notifications of future sessions, see past sessions, and make a donation to support our work. So with that, thank you very much, Peter, and we look forward to hearing from you again.
Oh,
Thank you.
thanks. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thank you.